In this video, I want to show you how to assemble your parts in Autodesk Inventor for your Automata. After you open Autodesk Inventor, you will need to create a new assembly file. So click on Standard IAM and choose Create. To place all your parts in and assemble your automata, you will want to be very thoughtful about what parts you need to bring in first. Remember that the first part that you bring into Autodesk Inventor in an assembly file is grounded based on the settings that we have made. So I'm going to go up to place, and then I'm going to choose the bottom first. When it comes in, you'll notice that it is kind of turned a weird way. Obviously, this is not where the bottom would belong in our view. So we might want to use the view cube to kind of rotate this around, and maybe this is what we want the front of the bottom to be. So we would want to change this on our view cube here to become the front view of the bottom of our automata. So on your view cube, once you set your view in place, you can right click and set current view as front. Then once you hit the little top right hand corner of your front view on your view cube, this should be your isometric view or your home view. So we will now right click on this corner and set view as home, fit to view. That way, anytime we hit the home button, it will always go to the isometric view of what we have based or assembled together based on the position of this bottom. Notice again that it is grounded, it has the tack mark. Let's begin assembling the box. I'm going to go to place, and I am now going to assemble the back of this box, and I'm going to hit open. Next, you will want to go to Constrain, and if we zoom in here and kind of move the boxes around a little bit, I'm going to constrain this, and I'm going to use my view cube to rotate the view around so that I can see the back of my box, and I'm going to choose this face right here of the back of the box, and I'm going to hit apply. I'm going to go back to my home view just to see what that looks like. Obviously, it is assembled, it is mated together, but it's still able to float around. When you're assembling your box and putting the pieces together, the cool thing about Inventor, you can easily just move the pieces around so you can see what you need to constrain next. So obviously you can see the teeth right here are going to be interlocked together. So that gives me a good way of trying to figure out what I need to flush to lock this back piece into place. So the first thing I'm going to do is go to Constrain, and in the Mate constraint, I'm going to choose Flush. I'm going to choose the side of this box, the back of the box, and then the side here of the bottom of the box, and I'm going to hit Apply. The reason why it's off is because we need to flush the back of the box. So I'm going to do that by going to Flush. Actually, we need to do the bottom. So I'm going to flush the bottom of the back piece right here to the bottom of the bottom and hit Apply. If I cancel out of this, now I can hit the home button. I can try to click on this box, the back of this box, and try to move it away, and I cannot. So now we have our back attached. Next, let's place the sides or the ends of the box. I'm just going to do one at a time, but basically what I want to do is go to Constrain and repeat the same steps that I just did, just really a different side. I'm going to choose this side face of the box and use my view cube to rotate this around. And then I'm just going to choose this part of the box, and I'm going to hit Apply. again, you can see that it's able to move around. And so looking at the teeth, that again gives me a good idea of where I need to flush the box. So I'm going to go to constrain, and I'm going to go to flush, and I'm going to flush the front of this end piece and the front of the bottom of the box, and click apply. Again, I'm going to go ahead and tilt this around so I can see the bottom of both pieces. And I'm going to place a flush constraint. Notice again on mate, this is the flush option, and I'm going to choose the bottom of this end piece and the bottom of the box. And I'm going to hit apply. I'm going to hit cancel, and you'll notice here that we have a side now placed, or an end of this box placed. Next, we need to do the other side, so I'll go to place, and I'm going to go to this one. This time I'm going to change it up a little bit and just show you a simple little feature here. I'm going to hit escape to get out of placing another piece. This time I'm just going to rotate. Maybe you want to rotate your pieces. So I'm going to go to free rotate right here. I'm going to click on this end piece, and I'm just going to kind of tilt this piece up and around until it gets a little bit more like how I think. And I'm going to right click, click OK. And now I'm going to flush or mate, this side of the box, this face here. And then I'm going to rotate this view around, and I'm going to choose just the side of the end and hit apply. Let's go back to the home view, and you'll see how far off we are. I can move it around, slide it into place, and again, this gives me the ability to see where I need to place some flush constraints. So again, I'm going to use the front here of these two. I'm going to go to flush, and I'm going to flush this piece, this end piece, to the front of this bottom piece and hit apply. And I'm going to tilt this up, and then I'm going to place a flush constraint from on the bottom of this end piece to the bottom of the box and hit apply. Hit my home view. I'm going to hit cancel. See if I can move this around. I cannot, and so now I'm ready for the top. Before you bring your top in, obviously each student's box will be different. Some of you may only need a top with 2 followers coming out of the top. Some of you will need a top that has 3 followers coming out of the top. And if you really push the limits here and you really wanted to get creative and you had more than 3 holes, however you redesign the top, you would need to bring that top in. I'm just simply going to go to place, and I'm going to choose the 2-hole top, and I'm going to hit open, and then I'm going to place that object or that top in. Next, I'm going to just kind of place some constraints, very similar to what I've done before. You should be able to visualize kind of like a puzzle piece how these pieces are going to go together. I'm going to go to constrain, and I'm going to just choose this piece here. I really could choose multiple options here, but I'm just going to choose this piece, and then I'm going to rotate my view up so I can see the bottom of this and choose the bottom there and hit apply. I'm going to go back to my home view. I'm going to hit cancel just so you can kind of see how it looks. That's kind of how we want it, but I'm going to slightly slide it out of place so that when I use the constrain option again, this time I'm going to choose flush. I'm going to flush the side of this top piece to the side of this end and hit apply. And then I'm going to place a flush constraint on the front edge here to the front edge of this end piece here and hit apply. Let's see if we can move anything around. I cannot, so now the box is assembled. We will not place a front side of this box. We want to be able to see into and see the cams working as we rotate the crank around. One thing that may be useful for you as you move forward and as you begin placing pieces is to either turn off a piece visually or make it transparent so you can see through it. I want to show you how to do that. If you'll come over here, for example, I want to make the top transparent. I don't want to turn it off. If I wanted to turn it off, I could right click on this piece and just uncheck the visibility, and it would actually turn it off. But I want to turn it back on. But I do want to make it transparent. So I'm going to right click on this piece and I'm going to choose transparent. That way I can see through it. Looks like almost like a piece of glass. Next, I'm going to do the same thing with the ends. I'm just going to come over here. I'm going to right click and I'm going to choose transparent for that piece and then transparent for that piece. Again, obviously this is not permanent. You could turn it back on, so when we go to place the next pieces, you could easily turn the transparency off so that you can see it maybe in a more normal fashion. But that's how you assemble the box for the automata. At this point, you will also want to save what you've done. So you can go to the disk up here and hit save and save your file to wherever you are saving your work at. Hopefully it is in your OneDrive. So you click on your OneDrive folder by clicking on this drop down option and then save your work wherever it should be. And I'm going to save it and call it Automata Assembly. And then I'm just going to click save. Now you should have an assembled automata box and your file saved, and you're ready to move on to the next part of the assembly. Now let's insert and assemble the axle bushing. Before you begin assembling all the parts to your automata, you're at a good place where you're going to want to go to each part and add an axis or work planes to the various parts. For example, here is the axle bushing. You'll notice that there is an axis that goes all the way through this axle bushing. There's also a work plane. You'll need to watch the video or get a demonstration from me in person to know how to apply these various things, but they will allow you to assemble the parts of the automata much easier with these in place for each part. Now let's go to place and let's pull in the axle bushing. I'm going to place one on the right side and one on the left side. Next, I'm going to go to constrain, and I want to choose this axis of the axle bushing, and then I'm going to choose this axis of this hole on the end of this box here. I'm just going to change the direction of this. I'm going to use this option right here, opposed, and I'm going to click apply. Now you'll notice that this thing is now sharing the same axis as the axis of the hole here that is in this end piece of the box. So what I want to do is add a mate constraint to this wall and then into the inside face of this right here of the axle bushing. What I do, I'm going to hit apply. Now you will see that this axle bushing is in place and it is sharing the axis of the wall, the hole in the wall. I'm going to do the same thing with this axle bushing. I'm going to go to constrain. I'm just going to use mate, and then I'm going to mate the axis right here. I might need to tilt this up just a little bit. And then notice again I'll need to use opposed and hit apply. And then I will place a mate constraint on the inside of that, and then turn my view around and place it here. And now these two axle bushings are in place. Before we move on to assembling the other parts, I want to lock these two or constrain these two axle bushings together. I'm going to go to constrain, and I want to place what is called an angle constraint, and I'm going to use the option here, undirected angle. And I'm going to choose this one, and then I'm going to choose this one. They grabbed it there. So I want to make sure the angle is 0. You'll see that right here. I'm going to hit apply. The reason I do that is so that when I turn one, the other will turn, and they are kind of locked together, so that when we go to add the axle, it'll kind of help us and save us a step down the road. So now we're ready to add the next part. Now let's bring in the axle and assemble it to the axle bushings. Go to place and insert your axle. Next, I'm going to place a constraint between the axis of the axle and the axis of the axle bushing. So I'm going to choose mate, and I'm going to mate this axle or axis to this axis. I'm going to press apply. I'm going to slide this thing over just so that it will be moved around. It'll kind of stick out a little bit. So now you can kind of see it's sharing the same axis as the axle bushing, and as I'm kind of rotating this around, you should be able to visually see that we need to lock in this work plane and this work plane together. To do that, I'm going to go to constrain. I'm going to choose angle, and then I'm going to choose undirected angle. I'm just going to choose this work plane and this work plane. I'm going to keep the angle at 0 and press apply. So at this point, we have two axle bushings, and one axle going through those two axle bushings. Now we're ready to apply or assemble the next piece. Now let's bring in the crank and let's assemble that to the axle. Go to place and bring in your crank. I'm going to put it on the right side of this box. I'm going to go ahead and free rotate this so that it is a little bit more to what I am expecting it to go on to the axle. It doesn't have to be perfect, obviously, as you can see. I'm going to go to constrain. I'm going to leave it on mate. I'm just going to mate this axle to this axle. And it actually is kind of pointing, the crank itself is pointing in the right direction. So I'm going to click apply. I'm going to cancel just so I can try to slide this over just a little bit. So really what I want to do is lock angle-wise this work plane of the axle and this work plane of the crank. So I'll go to constrain. I'm going to place an angle constraint, undirected angle between this work plane of the axle and this work plane of the crank. Try to lock them in place. Now when I turn the crank, I should be turning everything, but you'll notice it's sliding around a little bit. So I'm going to place a mate constraint between this axle bushing and this side of the crank and press apply. The last thing we need to do is we want to place a flush constraint. We want this to stick out, or at least we want control over how much of this axle is sticking out from the crank. So I'm going to go to constrain. I'm going to use flush, and I'm going to place a flush constraint on the outside of the crank right here and the end of this axle. And I'm just going to type in 0.25, and once it sticks out 0.25, that's good enough for me. I'm going to click apply and then hit cancel. Now if we zoom out and look at this, as we turn the crank, we can turn the axle. So that is the assembly so far of the two axle bushings, the axle and the crank. Now let's assemble the follower guide. Let's go to place. I'm going to bring in the follower guide that has 280 at the end. You may have seen that in the instructions. I'm going to hit open, and I'm going to place two of these because I have two holes at the top of my box. If you have three holes, you will need three of these. I'm going to first constrain the axis. So I'm going to constrain the axis of this follower guide to the axis here, and I'm going to hit apply. Then I'm going to do the same thing with this axis and this axis and hit apply. Next, I'm going to tilt up a little bit, or I may tilt this up first so I can see the bottom half of this. I'm going to mate the bottom of this follower guide to the top of the box. Hit apply. Do the same thing for the other follower guide. Place a mate constraint here and then mate it to the top here. Before we move on to the next part, we need to place an angle constraint with this work plane in the front of the box and hit apply. Actually, make sure I choose undirected angle here and hit apply. And then I'm going to place one here and again to the front of the box. That just locks these in where they cannot rotate. And so now we're ready to assemble the follower and the cams and some of the other parts we have to add to our automata. Now I'm going to bring in a follower, the roller, and my Mickey Mouse head. I'm going to assemble those off to the side and add those, or assemble those into the box as one whole piece. You'll see what I'm talking about as you see this demonstration. So I'm going to go to place, and I'm going to go to follower. I'm going to hit open. I'm going to place two of these. I'm going to go back to place, and I'm going to place two rollers. One here and one here. And then I'm going to place two Mickey Mouse heads here and here. I'm going to go to free rotate and just click on some of these parts and just kind of rotate these around just so that I can see how they're going to kind of look a little bit more on the screen. I'll click on this one. Rotate this one around. Don't have to be perfect. Let's see. I just want to get it close. Now I want to go to constrain, and I'll start with the follower and the roller first. So I'm going to mate the axis of the two together. Going to hit apply. Now I'm going to place a constraint, an angle constraint between this. I need to make sure it's undirected angle, and this. I want it to kind of flip itself around. I'm going to hit apply, and as we see here, this is now sharing the same, it's kind of going through it. So what I want to do is place a mate constraint on the inside of this roller. To the bottom of the follower. And hit apply. I'm going to repeat the same steps for the one on the right. And now I need to assemble the Mickey Mouse head using the axis of the two. Again, I'm going to slide. I'm going to ground just the roller. So that I can move this head up like I want it to. I want to do several things here. I want to place an angle constraint on one of Mickey Mouse's ears here to this work plane here. Just leave it at 0. But I also want to place a mate constraint on the top of this follower to inside of this head. I have to really flip this thing upside down. Click apply. And then I will repeat the same steps with the roller and follower on the right. I need to unground my two rollers that I grounded so that I could move them around. And I will now attach them to the top of the box going through the follower guides. So I will go to constrain, I will go to mate. Again, I will mate this axis to the axis of the follower guide. Hit apply. And then I will do the same thing over here with this one. Hit apply. You notice one's kind of going through it. I'll just pull it back up. Now what I want to do is put an angle constraint with this work plane. Actually, it needs to be undirected angle. From this work plane to this one, I want to put a 0 angle work plane. And then I'm going to do the same thing with this one. So now they are sharing the same axis. So that's a little bit more what you would expect it to look like. So one thing I could do is I could probably put some other constraints on here so that it doesn't go any further, but really what it's waiting on now is to get the cams on, and then we will assemble those. But that's how you do the follower, the roller for the follower, and whatever animation you have, hopefully your steps will be very similar to that. Now let's bring in some cams. Go to place and choose which cam you would like to bring in. I will bring in the hexagon cam, and then I will bring in, let's do the pair. The same steps will be taken for any two that you choose. If you have two followers coming through the top, as I do, if you have three, you'll obviously choose three. I'm going to go to constrain, and I'm going to mate. There's an axis that I have made through the center of this cam. I'm going to mate that axis to the axis of my axle. And so now it's sitting on there. I'm just going to slide it on to the side here. Let's go about right there. Then I will do the same thing again. This time I'm going to mate this axis to the axis here and hit apply. We'll go to the front view as you saw me do just a moment ago just to move this around. So I'm going to need to slide this cam back off a little bit so you can see exactly what I need to do next. You'll notice that I have a work plane on here. This will help me align this cam with the follower here, but I do need to turn on, so I'm going to expand the pair cam, and right here when I created this axis I had to use two work planes to do that. I'm going to turn this one on. This will allow me to match, so I'm going to put an angle constraint between, I'm not sure if you can see it, maybe if I flip around this way, this vertical work plane of the axle. I'm going to align those together or put an angle constraint between them. So angle, undirectional, I'm going to choose this one here and then choose this. I'm going to make it 0. I'm going to hit apply. So it should, when I rotate this, it should rotate the other. So I'm going to now slide this down, and then I will I'm just going to place a mate constraint between this work plane and this work plane right here, which will lock those two, or align those two, the work plane, the center work plane of the follower, the red follower, and the work plane that goes down the center or slices this pear cam. So if we zoom out, we can see now that it's going to stay in place. I can't move this pear cam any longer. Next, we're going to tilt this up a little bit, and we're going to go back to constrain. And this time we're going to use one called transitional. So we're going to choose transitional, and we're going to choose the very bottom of the roller right here, and then just somewhere like this part of the cam that we want this to follow, this profile. And then we'll cancel, we'll go back to the home view. And now as I crank this, you'll see that the follower for that side goes up and down based on the movement of that cam. You repeat sort of the same steps to with the hexagon. So we're going to move the hexagon off a little bit just so we can see a little bit more that's happening here on the side. I need to turn on a work plane here so I can constrain the hexagon to the axle. I'm going to go over here to hexagon and open up where it says work axis 1, and I believe it's work plane 2 that I need to right click on and choose visibility. I'm just going to slide this back on. Actually, what I'll do is I'll go to constrain, and I've already tried this, so I know which one I need to use, but just a minute ago I used mate to mate this plane to this plane, but for some reason it's not working with this. But if I go to flush, it will flush it. And so I'll do whatever I got to get this thing in the right place. Now I need to constrain, so this isn't free spinning here. It needs to be constrained to the work plane of the axle. So I'm going to place, let's try flush. Let's see if I can put a flush constraint with this and this. That doesn't look like it's going to work. So let's try, let me give myself a little bit more visual here. So I'll try an angled constraint between this and this. There we go. We'll do angled, undirectional, leave it at 0, and we'll hit apply. So let's hit cancel, make sure all of this turns together. It does. Last thing we need to do, and I really don't need to zoom out far for this, constrain, transitional, and I'm going to choose the bottom of the roller and this side of the hexagon, one of these 5 sides, hit apply, and then hit the home view. Let's try rotating this, and now we'll see that the heads are bouncing around. So this is a point where you're going to want to decide if you need more movement or not. So one way you can provide more movement is by obviously making your cams bigger. So as I rotate this around, I can see that I could actually make this pear cam a little bit bigger. I'm going to double click on this pear cam. It's going to take me into this drawing as if I'm kind of working on it. So I'm going to hit the parameters button, and I'm going to go into where I put 1. I'm going to make this 1.5. I'm just going to see what this does. I'm going to hit done. I'm going to hit return, and it updates itself. That looks a little too big, so let's go back to pair parameters. Let's try 1.25. Hit done. Let's go over here, and now let's hit return. And now let's rotate this thing. I should get way more movement out of the pear cam. Let's say the hexagon needs to be a little bit bigger. I can come over here and double click on hexagon and go to parameters. So it's as if I'm in the hexagon drawing, and this allows me to go in here. Let's try 1.5, and then I'm going to hit done, and then hit return and rotate this around. So now you can see how you can manipulate the size of your cams based on what you need. Just one little final thing that I noticed for mine, and you need probably to make these adjustments as well. On the Mickey Mouse ears, you'll notice that they're actually hitting each other. Obviously, I wouldn't want to do that. So I'm going to open up the first Mickey Mouse head, and this angled constraint that I put, I might just come in here and type a 45-degree angle. and just kind of turn it to the side, and then go to the other one, open up this angle constraint, and let's try -45. So they're kind of facing away from each other. I think that looks a little better. That way when I rotate this, they're not really hitting each other. So that's how you do a general assembly of the various parts of an automata. Obviously, whatever you do at the top of your box needs to be simulated in some way. This is just how I chose to do mine. I just chose these two little simple objects that bounce up and down for movement. But however you, or whatever you choose to use for your animation, you would just want to be very thoughtful about how you would make or assemble that to your box and simulate that type of movement. But hopefully you'll find this helpful as you try to assemble the parts of your automata. One of the final things you'll need to consider before you finish out your assembly of your automata is just turning off all the axis and work planes for each of these parts. To do that, you would open up the different parts here and just see if you see any axis. We'll go to the ends. I believe the ends have, so I have a work axis, so I can right click on this and uncheck the visibility of that. So you'll want to go through each part, for example, the axle bushing, and just right click on these work planes or axis and turn them off, turn off the visibility, so that your final view will be all the parts assembled together with no axis or no work planes on. That'll just look better when you go to put it on your sheet.